The cold wind howled through the northern hills as Robb Stark sat quietly in the war tent, his direwolf Grey Wind asleep beside him. The air was thick with tension, each decision weighed like iron on his young shoulders. War had taken much already. His father Ned, the peace of Winterfell, and now, with his bannermen looking to him for strength. One wrong step could cost them everything. Catelyn Stark paced the floor, her voice low and urgent. "You cannot trust Balon Greyjoy," she insisted. "He's a traitor. He rose against the throne once and was crushed. He will betray you the moment it suits him." But Robb's blue eyes remained fixed on the letter in his hand, the proposal from Balon Greyjoy. The Lord of the Iron Islands offered ships, men, and a fleet strong enough to challenge the Lannisters from the western coast. In return, independence, not just for the North, but for the Iron Islands as well. What if he doesn't? Robb finally spoke, his voice steady, thoughtful. What if he's tired of being under the heel of the dragons and lions, just like we are? Catelyn's silence said everything. She didn't trust Balon, no one did, but Robb had seen. Too much blood spilled already. He needed ships. He needed power. He sent word back. "Tell Lord Balon Greyjoy, the North accepts his alliance. We ride together for our freedom." Within weeks, the first signs of change appeared. Ironborn longships lined the coasts, banners bearing the Kraken flying beside the direwolf of Stark. The northern lords were uneasy, especially Lord Rickard Karstark and Greyjoy Umber, who had never trusted seamen and pirates, but they obeyed Robb. He was the king in the north. Theon Greyjoy returned to camp with his father's command. There was pride in his voice as he declared, "The Iron Islands sail for winter. My father is with you, my king." Robb looked at Theon, unsure whether to see a friend or a spy. But for now, he needed him. Together they marched south. The Ironborn struck the Westerlands with fire and salt, burning Lannister outposts, raiding supply lines, and controlling the western shores. Balon's fleet trapped the Lannister navy in their own harbors, and Casterly Rock stood vulnerable for the first time in generations. Tywin Lannister was furious. His son Jaime still sat in chains, and now his lands were burning. He moved west to defend the Rock, splitting his forces and leaving the Riverlands weakly guarded. It was the move Robb had hoped for. Riverrun rejoiced when Robb marched back through its gates, victorious from a campaign that had cost him little. With the Greyjoy ships guarding the coast and the Stark bannermen ruling the land, a new front had opened in the war, and the balance was shifting. But nothing came without a cost. As the alliance deepened, so did the whispers. Balon Greyjoy was not a man to bow or serve. Already, rumors came from the Iron Islands that he was styling himself High King of the Salt Throne, and equal to Robb, not his subordinate. At Winterfell, Maester Luwin watched as ravens came and went, carrying the weight of decisions and betrayals. Bran Stark, still crippled but wiser than his years, asked, "Can two kings ever truly be allies?" The Maester only sighed. "When power is shared, boy, peace is fragile." By the time summer faded, the North and the Iron Islands stood stronger than ever. But beneath their banners, old tensions festered. Theon, now commander of a small Ironborn force in the Riverlands, began behaving with arrogance. He claimed villages, not for the North, but for his father. And when the Northerners protested, blood was shed. Robb summoned Theon. "What's happening?" Robb asked sharply. "We're allies, not conquerors." Theon narrowed his eyes. "You think my father fought for you? We fight for the sea, for our independence. You promised him that, and I promised peace to my people," Robb growled. "Don't make me choose between the two." But that choice was coming fast. As Lannister forces regrouped, whispered of dragons rising in Essos, Robb Stark faced the storm of consequences. He had gained a powerful ally. But was Balon Greyjoy a sword at his side door, a dagger at his back? The council chamber in Riverrun was colder than usual, though the fire in the hearth blazed strong. Robb Stark stood at the head of the table, his hand gripping a goblet of watered wine, barely touched. Around him sat his most trusted lords Rickard, Karstark, Roose Bolton, and Gretchen Umber. The mood was sour, and the reason sat silently near the far end. "Theon Greyjoy, my men were attacked by Greyjoy raiders near Fairmarket," Karstark snapped. "3 villages burned, women taken, children gone. You call this an alliance?" Theon raised his chin arrogantly. "Fairmarket lies along the river, yes, but it connects to the coast. My men needed provisions, and the villagers resisted. Karstark slammed his fist on the table. "Because they are Northerners, not your enemies." Robb's voice cut through the room. "Enough. We are not here to fight each other while the Lannisters regroup." Roose Bolton, ever calm and quiet, leaned forward. "But fight we will. If these skirmishes continue, perhaps your grace should remind Lord Balon that alliances come with boundaries." Robb's jaw tightened. He had hoped Theon would bridge the two sides, act as the glue between Ironborn and Northmen. But Theon was proving to be every bit his father's son, rash, proud, and dangerous. Later that night, Robb called Theon alone to his quarters. No guards, no titles, just the 2 boys who had once grown up like brothers in Winterfell. "You have to stop," Robb said quietly. "My lords are turning on you. They're questioning me because of you." Theon scoffed. "Let them question. The North needs ships, and ships come with Ironborn. What did you expect, Robb? That my father would send fishermen and poets we raid? That's how we survive." Robb stepped closer, voice hardening. "You raid Lannisters, not my people." For a moment, Theon said nothing. Then, his voice lowered. "Maybe your people need to remember who holds the coast. Don't forget who made this alliance work." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but sharp. Robb looked at Theon and felt something crack. Whatever they had once shared as boys under Ned Stark's roof, it was gone. Meanwhile, far to the west, Lord Tywin Lannister was not idle. As Casterly Rock recovered from the Ironborn attacks, he sent out envoys, not to the Ironborn or the North, but to the Reach and the Stormlands. He whispered of betrayal, of division, of the barbaric pact between land and sea. One such envoy found its way to Stannis Baratheon, still licking his wounds after Blackwater. The idea that 2 kings in Westeros had split the continent among themselves enraged him. "Usurpers," he muttered. "Both of them." But the most dangerous seed was planted across the sea, in the city of Qarth. Daenerys Targaryen, now with dragons, growing stronger, received news of Westeros divided, 2 rebel kings fighting for freedom, but neither had Targaryen blood. "They will burn each other," Ser Jorah Mormont said, "and leave the throne for you." Daenerys looked to her dragons. "Let them, back in the Riverlands. Lord Balon Greyjoy had grown bold, now declaring the formation of the Western Salt Kingdom, a territory stretching from Pike to the Riverland's western edge, claiming all lands his ships could touch. Robb received the raven with disbelief. "He's carving out a kingdom within my kingdom," Robb said to his mother, fury rising. "He calls himself a high king now." Catelyn's voice was tired, almost resigned. "This is what comes from trusting old enemies. Balon Greyjoy was never your ally. He was a Tooland. Now he believes himself your equal." Robb faced a storm of rebellion from within. His bannermen urged him to act. "Break the alliance," Greatjon said. "Drive the Krakens back into the sea." But doing so meant opening a second front while the Lannisters still threatened from the south. And then came the final straw. Winterfell. Robb received word that Ironborn, under Theon's banner, had entered the castle, not as allies, as conquerors. Bran and Rickon were missing. The raven stopped flying. The hall fell silent as the words were read aloud. Robb's eyes went blank for a moment. Then he crushed the goblet in his hand. The war had changed again. What began as an alliance had turned into betrayal, and this time the cost would be paid in blood. The dire wolf howled under the red sky as Robb Stark stood atop the ramparts of Riverrun, the letter from Maester Luwin still clenched in his hand. His little brothers Bran and Rickon were gone. Theon Greyjoy had taken Winterfell, not for Balon, not for the alliance, but for himself. His mother stood behind him, quiet. Even she had no words now. All her warnings, all her doubts about Balon and Theon, they had come true. And worse, they had come at the cost of the very heart of the North. Robb turned to Roose Bolton and Greyjon Umber, who stood waiting for orders. "We ride," Robb said coldly. "Theon Greyjoy dies. His men die. I will burn their ships and salt their bones. They want war. They'll have war." Roose raised an eyebrow, and Balon Robb's jaw tightened. He made his choice. "The moment he let his son betray me, the Kraken is no longer my ally." In the days that followed, the northern banners were raised once more. No longer for alliance or rebellion, but for vengeance. From White Harbor to the Dreadfort, the North answered Robb's call. The phrase passed through every village and Holdfast like wildfire. The North remembers, but vengeance was not clean. As Robb and his forces marched toward the North, rumors followed him that Bran and Rickon had been murdered by Theon, that Winterfell burned, that the castle was nothing but charred stone and ashdod. When he finally reached Moat Cailin, it was held by Ironborn, a forward garrison left to block the king in the North's return. Robb gave no chance for surrender. His dire wolf, Grey Wind, tore through the shield wall like a beast possessed. His archers rained fire-tipped arrows onto the marshes, lighting the swamps in flames. Not a single Ironborn was left alive when it was over. And then came the march. To Winterfell. The castle loomed in the distance, dark and smoking, like a wounded creature bleeding into the snow. Robb felt his heart clench at the sight his childhood home desecrated. As they drew near, they saw the gates wide open. The bodies of the dead hung on spikes, and in the courtyard, a boy kneeling in chains. Theon Greyjoy. He was bruised, bleeding, eyes empty. Not a prisoner of the Starks, but a captive of his own men. "They turned on me," he muttered, almost laughing. "They left me here, ... said I was mad, ... said I brought death on all of us." Robb didn't speak. He looked around. At the destruction. The gods' wood had been set aflame. The crypts desecrated. No sign of Bran. No sign of Rickon. You killed my brothers, he said, low and dangerous. Theon shook his head slowly. No. I burned to farmer boys. I thought it would make them fear me. Catelyn stepped forward, eyes wide with disbelief. You murdered innocent children. You let the world think our sons were dead to feel powerful. Theon looked down. I didn't know what else to do. Robb stepped forward and pulled out his sword. No more words. But Catelyn put a hand on his chest. Let him rot. Don't give him the honor of a clean death. Robb stared at Theon for a long, silent moment, then turned away. The war was not over. Balon Greyjoy had not answered for his treachery. Word came that he had declared himself king of the Western Sea and had fortified the Iron Islands against retaliation. He believed Robb would never march his army across the ocean, but he had made a fatal mistake. He had turned Robb Stark into a king who had nothing left to lose. Robb ordered every ship in White Harbor and Bear Island to be seized. He sent ravens to House Manderley, to the sisters, even to Old Town. He wanted ships, would iron sails. He would build a fleet with northern hands if he had to. He would take the war to Balon Greyjoy's doorstep. At the same time, a new player entered the field. Stannis Baratheon, hearing of the Greyjoy betrayal, sent an envoy. I will bring you fire for your vengeance. The knight said, the Lord of Light favors justice. Robb was not a religious man, but he listened. Stannis had ships, Robb had armies, and they shared a common enemy. Behind closed doors, a second alliance began to form, one of steel, vengeance, and bitter necessity. As the snows deepened and the days grew darker, a storm began to brew, not just on the sea, but in the hearts of every northern man who had lost a son, a home, a future to the Krakens. Robb Stark no longer fought for thrones. He fought to punish, and the Iron Islands were next. The sea wind bit harder than the coldest gusts of Winterfell. Robb Stark stood on the deck of the White Vengeance, a warship newly forged by House Manderley's shipwrights. Dozens like it followed in formation behind northern ships, crude but sturdy, bristling with archers, boiling oil, and a fury unlike anything Westeros had ever sent across the sea. Beside him stood Lord Wyman Manderley, face flushed from the salt air but proud. We've never sailed this many ships, Your Grace, but they'll fight. We've all lost something to the Krakens. Robb nodded, eyes fixed on the mist ahead. Then we take it back. Winter had not just had been unleashed, and the Iron Islands would feel its bite. Balon Greyjoy, meanwhile, stood atop the high tower of Pike, watching the black waves crash against the rocks below. Ravens had come with warnings. Stark ships, Stannis ships, fire from the east, but he waved them off. The sea is our mother, he scoffed to his commanders. Let the wolves come, they'll drown like the rest. But Balon didn't see what was coming. Not just war but vengeance born from betrayal. Not just northern wrath but the fire of a red god. At Saltcliffe, the first ironborn port fell to the Northmen. The village burned as grey wind led the charge, tearing through ironclad raiders. Robb rode in with a blade of northern steel and eyes full of ice. No quarter, he commanded. Not until we reach Pike. Prisoners were rare. Any ironborn who stood against them were slain where they fought. The villagers, long oppressed by the Kraken banners, opened their gates to the wolf. Then came Harlaw, then Black Tide. Each one fell faster than the last. Robb split his forces, taking islands in coordinated waves, every strike faster, more brutal, more precise. Stannis Baratheon's ships soon arrived, red sails glowing against the grey sea. With him came Melisandre of Ishai, her red eyes shining like embers. She watched Robb carefully, whispering often of fate, of fire, of the Lord's chosen. "I'm not your chosen," Robb told her coldly. "I'm just a man avenging his people." She only smiled. Even vengeance serves the flame. On the 5th night of the campaign, a storm hit, fierce, unnatural. Sailors claimed they saw shadows moving across the waves, whispering names. Some men vanished from their beds, others screamed of drowned gods and fiery visions. Robb didn't flinch. He had seen worse things than ghosts. He had buried worse by the 7th day. They reached the shores of Pike, the Iron Islands, heart-fortified, jagged, ancient. The sea crashed violently below its bridges and towers. Ballistas lined its cliffs. Balon Greyjoy's fleet waited. In the bay, sleek and sharp, like black knives on the water. Robb's army set camp just beyond range of the Ironburn's arrows. A mist fell over the sea like a shroud. The next morning, Melisandre climbed the tallest rock near the shore and lit a great pyre. From it, she cast something into the fire, small deer carved from bone. "Blood of the stag," she whispered, "justice by flame." That night, the sea caught fire. Robb didn't know what magic she'd used. He didn't ask. But the Ironborn fleet burned before they even reached it. Black sails lit, orange masts fell. Men screamed from the waters as fire danced atop the waves like hungry wolves. With the enemy fleet crippled, Robb gave the order. "Take Pike." The assault on Pike was madness. Stone bridges, slick with blood, narrow towers crawling with Ironborn defenders. But Robb's army climbed. His archers cleared battlements. His direwolf fought at his side. And in the highest tower, Robb found Balon Greyjoy, still wearing his crown, still standing proud. "You broke your oath," Robb growled. Balon spat at his feet. "You're a child playing at war. The sea does not kneel." "No," Robb said, raising his sword. "It drowns." He drove his blade through Balon's chest. It was over. The Kraken had fallen. They flew the direwolf banner over Pike's tower. By dawn the North had done what no kingdom had ever dared. They had crossed the sea. They had conquered the Iron Islands, but the victory was not clean. Of his original commanders, many had died. Roose Bolton had vanished during the final assault. Rumors said he had been seen sailing south under a dark banner. Grey Wind had been wounded, and Robb himself now walked with a limp, a wound to his leg festering slowly. And though the islands were his, they reeked of rot and ruin. Melisandre stood beside him one night as he looked out at the horizon. "You have won," she said. Robb didn't smile. "Then why does it feel like I've lost everything?" She looked at him softly. "Because you have." The sea was behind him now, but the storm still lived inside his bones. Robb Stark stepped onto northern soil once more, his boots crunching on frost-covered grass as the banners of House Stark rose high above him. The men cheered the king. In the north, they cried, "Robb the Krakenslayer, Robb the Ironbreaker." But Robb didn't smile. Winterfell stood in the distance, rebuilt, but not whole. The stones bore scorch marks from Theon's betrayal. The towers looked thinner somehow, the gates too quiet. It felt like a memory, not a home. Catelyn waited at the gates. She ran to him as soon as she saw his horse, arms tight around his neck. "You came back," she whispered. Robb said nothing, just held her. For a moment, he was not king. He was her son. Inside, Maester Luwin walked with a limp, but his eyes sparkled with hope. "You've returned victorious, Your Grace. The North is whole again." But Robb's gaze moved past him. "Where are they?" he asked, voice low. The silence answered. Bran and Rickon had never been found. The farmer boys burned by Theon were not them. True, but their tracks had vanished. Some whispered they had escaped to the east. Others said they were dead, buried under the snows. Robb stood in the crypts that night, beside his father's tomb. "I avenged them, father," he said aloud. "I punished Theon. I crushed Balon, but I didn't bring them back." Grey wind behind him. Catelyn descended the steps, wrapped in furs. She had aged years since he last saw her, and the lines on her face told of sorrow she no longer had words for. "You did what you had to," she whispered, "but it wasn't enough." She touched his arm. "It never is. That's the curse of kings." Word of Robb's victory spread fast. The North celebrated. Songs were sung of the Wolf King who took the sea. But while his people praised him, Robb could feel the cracks forming beneath the surface. Roose Bolton's seat at the Dreadfort stood empty. His men had scattered, their banners gone south. No one knew where he had gone or what he was plotting. White Harbor. Lord Manderly sent word of troubling signs. Gold flowing in from King's Landing. Raven silence from the Vale. Spies moving in the night. The South was watching, waiting, and in the East the dragons were coming. A raven came bearing the seal of Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon's seal. He had declared war on Tommen Baratheon and the Lannisters, claiming the Iron Throne with renewed fury. "Join me," he wrote to Robb. "Let us break the lion's teeth once and for all." Robb stood at the long table. In the great hall, the message in hand, his lords around him. "We've only just healed," said Lady Mage Mormont. "Another war might break us." "We cannot trust Stannis," growled Greatjon. "He kneels to fire, not gods." But Wyman Manderly leaned forward, voice calm. "If we wait, the South will not. They'll come for us eventually. They always do." Robb didn't answer that night. He walked Winterfell's walls until dawn. He thought of his father, who had believed in honor. He thought of his brothers, lost to the wind. He thought of Theon, of Balon, of all the blood that had soaked his hands. He had won battles, but at what cost? In the days that followed, more letters arrived from Dorne Neutral, watching. From the Vale, still silent. From the East, whisper, Daenerys Targaryen, 3 dragons, and a growing army. The game had changed again. Robb gathered his council one final time. "I will not kneel," he said. "Not to Stannis, not to dragons, not to fire." They looked at him, confused. "I will not march to another's war. I will not bleed for their thrones." Lady Mormont narrowed her eyes. "Then what do you mean, Your Grace?" Robb stood tall, voice cold and clear. "I mean the North stays North. Let the South burn if it must. We've seen fire. We've fought Krakens. We've buried our dead." He looked around at his bannermen. "Now we protect what we still have, and we let the rest of the world destroy itself. A hush fell over the hall. For the first time in generations, the North would close its gates not out of fear, but out of choice. But peace is a fragile thing, and the South never forgets. The raven came at dawn, not from the south, but from the sky itself, singed half dead. With a scroll sealed in black wax, Robb Stark unrolled the message in the great hall of Winterfell. It was short, brutal, unmistakable. The mother of dragons has landed. Daenerys Targaryen had come to Westeros, not with diplomacy, not with emissaries, but with fire and wings. Her unsullied marched across the Stormlands. Her dragons flew. Over the Reach, Lannister strongholds fell in days. Kings burned in their own armor. The war Robb had refused to join had come to him anyway. He read the scroll aloud to his bannermen, the flickering torchlight casting shadows across their grim faces. She sends no demands, no threats, only a statement. The North will bend, or it will burn. A heavy silence followed. Then Greyjoy Umber stood up, knocking over his cup. "We crushed the Krakens," he shouted. "We can crush her too." But Wyman Manderly shook his head slowly. "You haven't seen dragons, Lord Umber. This is not Balon Greyjoy with ships. This is Valyria returned." Catelyn turned to her son, quiet and pale. "We cannot fight dragons, Robb. No one can. Even Aegon the Conqueror didn't burn the North because he knew." Robb's hand gripped the letter tighter. He said nothing. Later, that night, he walked the walls of Winterfell again. The snows had deepened. The trees in the Godswood stood bare and silent. Grey Wind trotted beside him, low to the ground, ears twitching. There was something in the air, a tension he couldn't explain. He saw a raven perched high on the watchtower, staring down at him, a different kind of raven, all white eyes, like ice. And suddenly he remembered something Maester Luwin once said: "The South brings fire, but the real danger comes from the North." That night, Robb had a dream. He stood on a battlefield of ash, Winterfell in ruins, dragons overhead, screeching. Grey Wind lay dead beside him. And across the field stood a girl with silver hair and eyes full of flame. "You were brave," she said, "but you were in the way." He woke up with sweat freezing on his neck. By midday, another raven came from the wall. Jon Snow had disappeared. Beyond the ice, the Night's Watch had suffered heavy losses, and there were whispers, mad whispers, of something moving in the far north. Something cold, ancient, silent. The war for the South was a distraction. The real war was on its way. Robb gathered his council one last time. The hall was quiet, every eye on him. He looked at each of them, slowly, as if memorizing their faces. "We don't kneel," he said. "Not to dragons, not to lions, not to fire. But we don't die for pride, either." He turned to Wyman. "Send an envoy to Dragonstone. We will speak with this queen, but not on our knees." Then to Catelyn, "Tell the Vale we must prepare. Every pass, every closed." And finally, to Maester Luwin, "Send riders north of the wall. If there are things coming, we need to know." That evening, he entered the crypts alone. He stood before Ned Stark's tomb and placed a hand on the stone. "I held it together as long as I could, Father. I avenged you. I broke the Krakens. I brought fire to their shores. But the world has changed, and I don't know what I am anymore. A king, a warrior, or just ... the last Stark trying to hold back the tide." No voice answered him, only silence. Above, storm clouds gathered over Winterfell. Dragons circled the southern sky, and far beyond the wall, something ancient opened its eyes in the dark. The song of ice and fire was no longer a legend. It was here, and Robb Stark-born, king-forged vengeance, made stood at its center, no longer just the king in the north, but the man who would face the storm from both ends of the world.